They didn't just nail a notice to my gate, they nailed a threat to my life. Imagine waking up on your own farm only to find strangers in tactical vests claiming you suddenly live under their HOA. And when I refused to bend, they called the cops. But here's the part they never saw coming. The sheriff they dragged into their fake raid was my brother. I'll never forget the way the sunlight hit that piece of paper like some cruel spotlight calling out a show I never agreed to star in. It was early morning, the kind where the mist still clings to the edges of the pasture, and the goats haven't quite decided if they're awake yet. I went out with a mug of coffee, same as always, and there it was, a bright red sheet of paper nailed to my front gate with a 6-inch rusted nail. It looked theatrical, almost staged, as if someone wanted the first impression to feel like a warning shot. At first I thought it was some prank from teenagers. The paper fluttered in the breeze, sharp edges curled from the nail, the letters stamped in bold black ink, emergency repossession notice. Beneath it, an official-looking seal. Not from the county, not from the state, something more absurd. Simmons Valley, HOA. Now here's the catch. I don't live in Simmons Valley. Never have. My farm, 80 acres of stubborn soil and old fences, sits right outside their manicured borders. I've always kept my distance from HOA territory. I didn't want their rules, their fines, or their beige conformity. So when I saw that paper, I laughed out loud. But the laugh didn't last long. The notice listed 3 violations. First, livestock containment breach. Second, unauthorized fencing design. And third, failure to comply with aesthetic standards subsection 14D. My goats had no idea they were now criminals. My wooden fence apparently offended the suburban gods, and my barn, built by my father's own calloused hands, wasn't aesthetic. The fine, $4,700. The deadline, vacate by Friday, or face immediate removal. Signed at the bottom, Karen Whitmore, President, Simmons Valley, HOA. The name made my stomach knot. Everyone in the county knew Karen. She was the type who carried a clipboard like it was a sword, and thought her word carried more weight than state law. People told stories about her, the endless fines, the intimidation tactics, the way she bullied anyone who stood in her way. But even for her, this was bold. This wasn't a late fee on a mailbox color, this was attempted land theft. I ripped the notice off the gate, but I kept it in my hands. The paper was too polished, too carefully worded. There was no way this was a prank. The fine print at the bottom claimed it was filed under emergency expansion guidelines. Guidelines I'd never heard of. Guidelines that sounded like they'd been invented in the back of a Starbucks over cold lattes. Still, there was a strange weight to it, a kind of audacity that made me pause. My first instinct was to call the county office, but something stopped me, a gut feeling. Instead, I walked the perimeter of my property, and that's when I noticed something even stranger. At the north field, just beyond the row of oak trees, there were tiny orange flags sticking out of the ground. Plastic survey markers bright against the morning dew. I hadn't placed them there. My neighbors hadn't either. My goats had already started chewing on 2 of them, dragging them through the mud. Survey markers meant one thing: someone was mapping. Someone was trying to redraw boundaries. And if Karen had already claimed my land on paper, these flags were the first step to claiming it in reality. I went back to the farmhouse, laid the notice on the kitchen table, and stared at it while the coffee cooled. My father always used to say, paper can steal faster than any thief. At the time, I never understood what he meant. But sitting there, staring at Karen's forged authority, I felt the truth in his words. This wasn't a game. This was a war, and the first shot had already been fired. The anger bubbled up slowly. How dare she? How dare this HOA, these people with their manicured lawns and golf carts, think they could march across county lines and dictate terms on my land? My family had worked this soil for generations. Every fence post had been driven by hand. Every acre carried history. And now, with 1 nail and 1 piece of paper, they were telling me I didn't belong. I tried to brush it off, told myself it was nonsense, that no court would uphold it. But the unease stayed. And when I walked back to the gate an hour later, the unease turned to certainty, because parked just down the gravel road, half hidden by trees, was a matte black SUV. It wasn't the county sheriff. It wasn't any official vehicle I recognized. The windows were tinted dark, too dark. And though the car didn't move, I could feel eyes on me. Watching, waiting, the kind of silence that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. That's when I realized this wasn't just a letter. It was a message. They weren't asking me to comply. They were daring me to resist. And deep down, I knew exactly who they were. Karen's fingerprints were all over this. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was expanding territory. HOA, imperialism. I crumpled the notice in my fist, but I didn't throw it away. Instead, I smoothed it back out and slipped it into a folder. If this was going to escalate, and I had no doubt it would, then I'd need every scrap of evidence, every detail. Because people like Karen don't stop. They push until someone pushes back harder. By the time the sun set, the SUV was gone, but the flags were still there, and the red imprint of that notice still burned in my mind. My land, my home, my family's legacy, suddenly it all felt fragile like paper waiting to be torn. That night, as the crickets sang and the goats settled in the barn, I sat on the porch and stared out into the dark. Somewhere out there, Karen was planning her next move, and if I knew anything about her, it wouldn't take long. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. The next day, I was mending a section of fence when the low growl of tires on gravel cut through the quiet. At first, I thought it was a delivery truck, or maybe a neighbor stopping by. But then, I caught the glint of black paint through the trees. An SUV rolled slowly down my driveway, its windows tinted so dark it looked more like a hearse than a car. My stomach tightened. This wasn't the kind of visitor who brought good news. The vehicle stopped halfway down the drive, and two men stepped out. Both wore tactical vests, cargo pants tucked into boots, and mirrored sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. They weren't dressed like deputies from the county that much, I knew. One carried a clipboard, the other rested his hand on his hip a little too close to a holster. "Morning, sir," Clipboard said, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're here to conduct a compliance inspection on behalf of the Simmons Valley HOA. I blinked, slowly, deliberately, the kind of blink you give when you're trying to process the sheer stupidity of what you just heard. "You have a warrant?" I asked. "Under Municipal Subcode Emergency Expansion Protocol, authorizes perimeter verification without resident consent." He rattled off like a memorized script. A lot of words for one simple truth: no. I stepped between him and the barn. "You're not coming near my property with that vest, that attitude, or that clipboard. Not today." The second guy shifted one hand, hovering just close enough to his holster to make a point. His posture said, "We want you to think this can go bad fast." I met his gaze and didn't flinch. "Unless you're actual law enforcement, or you've got a legally binding warrant signed by a judge, you're trespassing." Clipboard smirked and pulled out his phone. "We'll be noting your resistance. This will escalate." "Oh, I hope so," I said, my voice calm but my blood humming hot. Because I love paperwork. They turned back toward their SUV. That's when I noticed something taped to the inside of the windshield. A badge. Not metal, not official. Just laminated paper, printed crooked with the letters HOA Enforcement across the front. I couldn't help myself. I laughed. I pulled my own phone from my pocket and snapped photo after photo. The badge, their gear, the license plate, every detail. They didn't even try to stop me. Maybe they thought intimidation alone was enough. As they drove away, tires crunching over gravel, I opened the local Simmons Valley message board on my phone and uploaded the photos with a caption, "New HOA cosplay unit spotted. Looks like Blackwater took over lawn care." Within minutes, the comments exploded. "Same guys knocked on my barn door last week," one neighbor wrote. "Said they needed to check my grain bins for health violations." Another posted, "This isn't compliance. This is intimidation. Straight up extortion." But the one that made me pause came from Old Man Duffy, who lived 4 houses down. He'd seen everything in his 80 years, a man whose words carried weight. His comment was short. "Told y'all years ago, Karen's HOA ain't a neighborhood group. It's a cult." The word hung in my mind like smoke. A cult. That explained the way these people moved, the robotic recitation of rules that didn't exist, the dead-eyed loyalty to Karen. This wasn't about fences or livestock. This was about control. As I scrolled through the replies, my phone rang. The screen lit up with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Daniels," a crisp female voice said. Smooth, confident, poison wrapped in honey. "This is Karen Whitmore, president of the Simmons Valley HOA. I'm calling to confirm you've received our notice." I took a breath, tightened my grip on the phone. "You mean the one illegally nailed to my gate?" "Nailed is a harsh term," she replied, her tone clipped and smug. "We secured it for visibility, and it's not illegal under the new emergency expansion guidelines." I barked a laugh. "Which guidelines?" "The ones we voted on last quarter." I gritted my teeth. "Funny, I don't recall being invited to that meeting. That's because it was for residents of Simmons Valley." "I'm not in Simmons Valley." Her pause was brief but sharp. "You are now." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, rage boiling beneath my skin. The arrogance in her voice, the absolute certainty that she could just redraw borders and declare my land hers, it made my hands shake. I wanted to smash the phone, but I forced myself to stay calm. Evidence. Always keep evidence. That night, as the sun sank and shadows stretched across the fields, I walked the northern boundary of my land. Sure enough, more orange survey flags had appeared, planted neat and precise, like someone was laying out a chessboard. My goats tugged them free and chewed them like toys, but the message was clear. Karen wasn't bluffing. She was mapping my property like it already belonged to her. I yanked one of the flags from the dirt. Black marker numbers scrawled across the plastic coordinates. Someone had done their homework. This wasn't some sloppy HOA scam. This was organized, planned. Back at the farmhouse, I sat at the kitchen table again, the notice spread beside the survey flag, the photos glowing on my phone. My father's words echoed in my head, paper can steal faster than any thief. I knew then that Karen wouldn't stop. She'd send more of her goons, more fake cops, more notices. She'd keep tightening the noose until I either gave up the land or fought back. And if she thought I was the kind of man to roll over, she'd made a fatal miscalculation. I poured myself another cup of coffee, black and bitter, and stared out the window into the night. Somewhere out there, Karen was smiling, convinced she'd already won. But she had no idea the storm she'd just started. Because I wasn't just going to defend my land, I was going to expose her. The morning after Karen's smug little phone call, I woke up already on edge. Sleep had been thin-shredded by the sound of wind rattling the old barn windows and the nagging thought that I wasn't alone on my land anymore. I'd lived here for years, and never once had I felt unsafe. But now, after 2 fake cops and 1 laminated badge, even the silence felt staged, like someone was watching and waiting for me to make a wrong move. I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee and scanned the horizon. My field stretched wide and open, but something was different. At first glance, it looked like weeds or trash blowing in the grass. Then my gut dropped. More orange survey flags. Dozens of them, this time stuck in neat little rows along the edge of the north pasture. Overnight, my property line had been invaded not with bulldozers or guns, but with plastic flags and Sharpie coordinates. I walked out crunching through the dew and pulled one from the dirt. On the stick was a number handwritten precise. They weren't guessing anymore. They were measuring, mapping. And if Karen's voice on the phone had been dripping with arrogance, this was her proof of power. She wasn't waiting for me to comply. She was expanding the battlefield whether I liked it or not. I spent the next hour yanking out every single flag I could find, tossing them into a pile on the porch like a bonfire waiting for a match. But even as I ripped them up, I knew it wouldn't stop her. She'd send people back tomorrow and the next day until the land was lined with markers again. A slow bleed of territory. HOA imperialism, in plastic and ink. I finally drove into town. The county office sat in a squat brick building, its beige paint peeling under the relentless sun. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and dust, the kind of place where complaints go to die. I carried the notice, the photos, and one of the survey flags under my arm, determined to make someone take this seriously. The woman at the front desk barely looked up as I laid everything in front of her. "I'd like to file a report for attempted impersonation of law enforcement," I said, keeping my voice level. She adjusted her glasses and skimmed the notice. Her eyebrows rose slightly at the words emergency repossession. Then she sighed. "We've had a few of these." My jaw tightened. "How many is a few? 11 this month. You're 12. I leaned in. "And what's been done about it?" She shrugged, tapping a pen against her clipboard. "Most people just pay the fines and hope they go away." That answer burned hotter than the notice itself. People were paying. Karen wasn't bluffing. She was running a racket, and it was working. "Well, I'm not most people," I said. The woman looked at me for the first time, really looked. There was something sharp in her gaze, something that said she'd heard stories about me. Then quietly she slid a sticky note across the counter. "You should talk to this guy." I glanced down. In neat block letters it read Sheriff Mark Daniels, my brother. For a moment the weight of it all hit me harder than any threat Karen could make. My brother and I hadn't been close lately. Life had pushed us into different lanes. He wore a badge. I wore boots caked with mud. But if Karen thought she could drag the sheriff's office into her little empire without me having backup, she was about to learn a painful lesson. That night I called him. Told him everything, the nailed notice, the fake cops, the laminated badge, the survey flags. He didn't interrupt, didn't laugh, didn't dismiss a word. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Finally," he said, "you're not the first." The words froze me. I figured, I replied slowly. "But you're telling me my case is different." "Yes," he said. It's not just about fines or fences anymore. This is about control and what they're planning next. I pressed him. What is it then? What's their real endgame? I can't talk over the phone. Just hold the line, keep your head clear, and get proof. His voice carried weight, the kind that came from years of walking into danger and knowing when it was bigger than you. But it also scared me. If even he wasn't willing to talk on the phone, that meant Karen's game wasn't small. It was wide, organized, dangerous. I hung up, staring into the dark farmhouse kitchen. My land, my goats, my barn, they suddenly felt like pieces on a chessboard I hadn't agreed to play on. And Karen, clipboard in hand, was making all the moves. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the barn felt like footsteps. I checked the locks twice, carried my phone in my pocket even to bed, and just when I thought I'd finally drift off, the dogs started barking. I rushed to the porch. At the far end of the field, under the pale glow of the moon, I saw more flags. Dozens, maybe hundreds, stretching in lines across the pasture like veins of fire cutting into my land. Whoever had planted them had done it fast, efficient, military style. I stood there, barefoot in the grass, the night air cold on my skin, and I realized something chilling. This wasn't Karen alone. No clipboard warrior could orchestrate something this calculated. She might be the face of it, the voice on the phone, but behind her was something bigger, a machine with gears already turning. I yanked one more flag from the dirt and whispered into the night, not on my watch. But deep down I knew the war had only just begun. The raid didn't come with warning sirens. It came with the crunch of tires on gravel and the glint of headlights slicing through the dawn fog. I was in the kitchen pouring my first cup of coffee when the dogs erupted into a frenzy. Their barks weren't playful, they were frantic, sharp, the kind that drills into your chest. I set the mug down, grabbed the shotgun I kept by the door, and stepped onto the porch. What I saw made me blink twice. 4 matte black SUVs idled at the end of my driveway, their engines humming low, their windows dark. Stenciled on the side in white block letters, Civic Enforcement, Simmons Valley Compliance Division. Not law enforcement, not any government agency, just HOA cosplay with a budget. Doors opened in unison like some low-budget military drill. 6 men stepped out, all in khaki uniforms, steel-toe boots, and tactical belts. One carried a drone remote. Another cradled a laminated folder like it was a badge of authority. Their movements were stiff, rehearsed, wannabe soldiers drunk on a clipboard crusade. And then she appeared, Karen Whitmore, the queen of beige tyranny herself. She stepped out of the lead SUV wearing aviator sunglasses, a tailored windbreaker that probably cost more than my tractor, and of course the infamous clipboard clutched in her hand like a royal decree. "Good morning," she called out, her voice syrupy but sharp. "We're here to initiate Phase 2 of your compliance review." I took a long sip of coffee, let the bitterness settle on my tongue, and stared at her over the rim of the mug. "Did Phase 1 get lost in the mail? You received proper notice," she said, tilting her head with that plastic smile. "You chose not to respond. We are now authorized to inspect and seize any structures or materials in breach of code." I stepped off the porch, hands in my hoodie pocket, calm, and measured even as my blood boiled. Which code? Simmons Valley's Extended Covenant, Article C. I chuckled. There's no such thing. It was ratified at the last board meeting. There is no board, I shot back. There is now. She gave a subtle nod, and her goons moved into formation. 2 peeled off toward the barn, 1 launched a drone into the air, and another began walking my fence line like he was doing reconnaissance on a battlefield. The whole thing looked absurd, like a bad reality show about suburban warriors. Sir, one of them said, "Please don't interfere." "Interfere," I barked, a laugh. "You're on my land." Planning to arrest me for walking across my own dirt, Karen stepped closer, her sunglasses reflecting the porch light. "We can do this peacefully," she said. "Or we can escalate. Your choice." I raised an eyebrow. "You brought 6 rent-a-troopers and a drone to inspect a barn. Tell me, Karen, does that clipboard double as a shield?" Her smile faltered for the briefest second. I whistled sharply, the kind of whistle that carried across the pasture. The goats answered in unison, bleating like a war cry before sprinting toward the barn. Chaos incarnate. Maggie, the meanest of the herd, lowered her head and charged straight at one of Karen's khaki warriors. He yelped and jumped back, as the others flailed, trying not to get trampled by 80 pounds of horned fury. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She pulled out her phone and began recording. Just another example of escalating hostility from non-compliant residents, she narrated into the camera. "We're documenting this." I gave her a big, toothy grin. "Smile harder, Karen. That footage will look great when it's subpoenaed." Before she could reply, another set of headlights cut through the morning mist. This time it wasn't black SUVs, it was a marked sheriff's cruiser. My heart jumped, and for a split second I wondered if Karen had somehow pulled the county into her scam. But when the door opened, I saw a familiar face, Deputy Ramirez. He stepped out calm and confident, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming under the rising sun. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice casual but firm. Karen turned, trying to assert control. "We are in the middle of an HOA enforcement operation. Please stand down." Ramirez cocked an eyebrow. "You're what?" "These residents are in violation of multiple codes," she declared. "We are executing a legal inspection." Ramirez shifted his gaze to me. "Did you invite these folks?" "Nope," I said. "Do you consent to this inspection?" "Absolutely not." He turned back to Karen, his jaw tightening. "Then they're trespassing. Ma'am, you and your unit need to vacate immediately. And that drone, it's illegal to fly over private agricultural property without clearance." Karen's eye twitched. "This is outrageous. This is the law." Ramirez cut her off. For the first time, Karen's facade cracked. She leaned in close, her voice dropping so only I could hear. "I hope your niece enjoys applying for scholarships from an off-grid property riddled with violations." My blood turned to ice. I didn't let it show, but inside something snapped. She wasn't just threatening me anymore, she was threatening my family. Her crew hesitated, looking to her for guidance. One of them muttered, "She said we had clearance." Another whispered, "She said we were covered." But Karen just barked orders, forcing them back into formation. They retreated to their SUVs, their so-called raid dissolving into an awkward march of defeat. As the last truck pulled away, I caught sight of one younger guy in the group. He hesitated at the edge of the driveway, his eyes meeting mine. For a split second, the mask slipped. Regret, uncertainty, maybe even shame. Then Karen snapped at him and he turned away like the rest. I stood there, fists clenched, the sun rising over the field, painting everything in gold. My goats went back to butting heads, Ramirez drove off after giving me a nod, and I was left with the bitter taste of Karen's words in my mouth. She'd threatened my family, and that wasn't something I could let slide. The war had gone from paperwork to personal. After Karen's little parade down my driveway, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would quiet down for a while. But that was wishful thinking. When people like her feel the sting of defeat, they don't back off. They regroup, they plan, and then they come back sharper, meaner, and twice as desperate. I knew it. I felt it in my bones. Still, I wasn't prepared for how fast the next move came, or how close it struck to home. It started with small inconveniences, the kind of things you brush off if you're not paying attention. One morning, the lights in the barn flickered out while I was checking the feeders. I figured it was a breaker. 2 nights later, the entire property went black for 15 minutes. No storm, no downed lines, just a sudden eerie silence. The power came back on, but the timing gnawed at me. Both outages happened right when my security cameras were uploading footage to cloud storage. Then came the fences. I've spent enough years mending wire to know the difference between wear and sabotage. One section along the south pasture had been sliced clean through copper, severed like it had met a pair of bolt cutters. No chew marks, no weathering, just deliberate sabotage. And it happened the same week. I noticed Maggie, the most stubborn goat of the herd, wandering dangerously close to the road, with one of those survey flags dangling from her mouth like a trophy. At first I chalked it up to random vandalism. Maybe a bored teenager with nothing better to do. But then I noticed something else. Tools went missing. Not all at once, not obvious. A wrench here, a shovel there. Enough that I started to wonder if I was losing my mind, but I wasn't. Someone was creeping in slowly, carefully, testing the boundaries. And the worst part, whoever it was, they had access. I run a lean farm. Help is hard to come by, and when someone reliable shows up, you keep them around. A few months back, I'd hired a new hand. Darren, mid-30s tall, soft-spoken, always punctual. He came recommended from a neighboring property and seemed decent enough. Didn't drink on the job, didn't complain about the work, but lately, something felt off. Darren had a habit of asking too many questions. Not about the livestock, not about chores, about systems. Where's the backup generator? You got redundancies for your security cameras. Ever think about solar panels as a secondary grid? On the surface, it sounded helpful. But then I started catching him walking around with his phone held at chest height, the screen glowing faintly like he was filming. Not in front of him, up-angled toward the barn loft window. The same window where I kept the safe. A knot twisted in my gut. I needed to be sure, so I set a trap. In the shed out back, I planted a binder with big block letters across the front. Property transfer options. Confidential. Inside, nothing but blank paper. I left it sitting out on the workbench, unlocked, obvious. Then I waited. 3 days later, the binder was gone. I didn't confront him, not yet. I bided my time, keeping my suspicions close. And then one Thursday night at 1:17 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. The well cam. I tapped the live feed and there he was. Darren Hoodie pulled up, flashlight in one hand, a black messenger bag slung across his shoulder. He moved across my property like he'd done it 100 times. Careful, deliberate, confident. I grabbed the one thing I knew I'd need, a heavy mag light, and slipped out into the cold. The night air bit my skin, but adrenaline kept me sharp. I tracked him by the beam of his flashlight until I caught him near the pump house. Forgot to clock out, I asked, my voice cutting through the dark. He spun around, eyes wide, dropping the flashlight and the bag. His breath came out fast and ragged, but then something shifted in his face. He didn't look guilty. He looked angry. It's not what it looks like, he snapped. Then, you better say something smart in the next 10 seconds. Instead of pleading, he stepped forward. You think you're some kind of hero, sitting on stolen land, barking orders like you're better than the rest of us. Karen told me the truth about this place. Told me your family rigged the original land deal, that this farm was always meant to go back to the community. I stared at him, stunned by the sheer audacity. You mean Karen, the same woman who forges HOA bylaws, told you my dad was a land thief? She showed me documents. Darren shot back. She said you wouldn't listen, that you were a risk, that this property was the key. I shoved him back when he tried to step closer. So what, cutting my fences, sabotaging my power, that was you doing the community a favor? His jaw clenched. He bent down, picked up the bag, and unzipped it. Inside, a burner phone, a tablet, a folded map of my property covered in red ink notes. Trigger points. Fence cam blind spot. Well access unguarded. Barn loft circled twice. And at the bottom, underlined in bold red strokes, evacuation trigger. The 4th of November. I glanced at the date. 2 days away. I snatched the tablet, powered it on. It auto-launched to a folder labeled Phase 3, Daniels. My name. Inside were surveillance photos, power usage charts, and camera stills from angles I didn't even own cameras for. Someone else had eyes on me, feeding information straight into Karen's playbook. And there, at the bottom of a PDF marked priority report, were the words, "Subject is demonstrating resistance to de-escalation attempts. Acceleration recommended. Authorization signature, K. Whitmore." The realization hit me like a hammer. Karen wasn't reacting to me. She was orchestrating every move. Darren wasn't a farmhand. He was a plant, a mole, a saboteur. I stared down at him, fists trembling with fury. You picked the wrong side. For a moment, his bravado cracked. His eyes darted to the trees like he expected backup to appear. But no one came. Just me, him, and the cold night air. And I knew right then this wasn't just about defending my farm anymore. This was about exposing the rot that had dug its way into my land, my life, and maybe the entire county. Karen had crossed the line. And now so had I. When I finally dragged Darren's messenger bag into the farmhouse and dumped its contents across the kitchen table, the truth lay scattered in front of me like a puzzle my father had warned me about long before I ever understood the rules. Pages of notes, hand-drawn maps, forged letters, and that tablet glowing with files labeled in cold, bureaucratic language. But what shook me most wasn't Darren's betrayal. It was the realization that Karen's grip on this county stretched back decades long before I'd inherited the farm, before I'd even been born. I spent the rest of that night digging through my father's old lockbox, the one he kept hidden under the floorboards of the barn loft. He'd told me once, half-jokingly, "Someday you'll find out paranoia runs in our family. But around here, paranoia keeps you standing." Inside the box were yellowed survey maps, receipts from county offices, legal correspondence, and one thick spiral notebook in his handwriting, the pages filled edge to edge with names, dates, and disputes. At the top of one section, circled in red ink, was a name that made my blood run cold: Karen Whitmore. According to my father's notes, Karen hadn't started as an HOA president. 30 years ago, she'd been a junior agent at a development firm called Greenfield Expansion, pushing luxury subdivision projects. He'd circled a line from an old zoning commission hearing in 1991 proposal, denied due to environmental overlap and excessive structural impact. And right next to it, in his handwriting, applicant Whitmore K. We'll try again. I leaned back, running my hands over my face. She'd been at this since before I was old enough to ride a bike. 30 years of obsession, 30 years of waiting for her chance to redraw the map. The more I dug, the clearer it became. She'd tried to buy our land outright, once offering triple what it was worth at the time. My father refused. She pivoted, trying to pressure through zoning loopholes, denied again. Every time she failed, she filed something new: easement disputes, environmental reports, even a frivolous claim about livestock runoff. Each attempt ended in the same place: failure. And each time my father wrote her name in red. But now things had changed. She wasn't working alone anymore. Darren's files showed a partnership with a shell corporation, Mason Ridge Holdings. On paper, it looked like just another development group. But the deeper I read, the uglier it got. Mason Ridge had quietly swallowed up dozens of properties across 3 counties, always through compliance enforcement, always fronted by local HOAs that suddenly sprouted new rules no one remembered voting on. One document chilled me to the core: a development contract stamped with both Karen's signature and that of Zachary Lauren, the county zoning chief. The same man who just 2 weeks ago told me over coffee, "I hope you never sell this place." There's something sacred about land with history. Now I had proof he was signing my land away behind my back. I pulled out the real deed to the farm from the safe, the one my father signed in faded ink decades ago. Beside it, I laid down a forged deed I found on Darren's tablet. Identical font, identical file number. The only difference, the signature. Mine scanned and pasted. My stomach twisted as I realized what they'd planned. They weren't just pressuring me with fines and intimidation. They were preparing to erase me on paper to make it look like I'd already handed my farm over. The anger boiled up so hot I had to walk outside. I paced the gravel driveway under the moonlight, fists clenched. Karen had been coming for this land my entire life. My father had seen it. He'd left me the breadcrumbs in that lockbox, and still I'd underestimated her. By the time the sun rose, I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I called my brother, Sheriff Mark, and laid it all out. Darren's infiltration, the forged deeds, the Mason Ridge contract, even the zoning chief's betrayal. His silence on the other end of the line stretched long, but when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. "You're not wrong," he said. "We've been watching Karen's moves for a while. But this is bigger than a zoning scam. This is organized fraud conspiracy. And if you're holding the proof I think you are, then you've got the key to bringing her down." I told him I wasn't just holding it. I was staring at it right then, spread across my kitchen table. He told me to lock everything away, make copies, and trust no one. Not even deputies outside his direct command. Karen had roots too deep, connections in too many offices. That evening, he drove out in plain clothes, parking half a mile down the road and walking in through the back pasture. He sat with me in the barn, scanning each document, each forged signature, his jaw tightening with every page. "She's been planning this for 30 years, I said quietly. "She's not smart enough to build it," he replied. "But she's ruthless enough to run it." He slid one contract back across the table, his eyes cold. "This isn't just about your farm anymore. Mason Ridge has plans for the entire valley. You're phase 1. Phase 1. The words rattled around my skull. If my land fell, the rest of the valley would follow. Farms, homes, families erased under HOA bylaws no one had ever agreed to. I looked at the barn walls, at the old beams my father had raised with his own hands. He used to call it the Freedom Box, a place built not just from wood and nails, but from stubbornness and principle. And now Karen wanted to bulldoze it into dust for a development project with a shiny clubhouse and beige fences. Not on my watch. I closed the box, locked it, and looked my brother in the eye. "She wants a war of paperwork." "Fine, but I'll give her one she won't survive." He nodded slowly. "Then you better be ready, because once we move, she'll throw everything she's got at you." The storm had been building for 30 years, and now it was finally breaking. The morning Karen chose to make her final move, the sky carried that strange stillness you only notice if you've lived on land your whole life. No birdsong, no breeze, just pressure. The kind that coils in your gut and whispers that a storm is coming even when the clouds look clear. I stood on the porch with a thermos of black coffee boots laced tight, watching the long stretch of gravel road that led to my farm. Every instinct told me today was the day. I hadn't been idle since discovering Karen's 30-year obsession. My brother Mark had been back twice, both times, in plain clothes, helping me wire the barn and the fence lines with cameras that streamed live to an encrypted server off-site. We coordinated with Don Wallace, my neighbor, who also happened to be a lawyer. He'd been waiting for the right moment to file a class action suit against Karen's HOA. And the other farmers, quiet for months out of fear, were finally willing to stand up, knowing someone else was drawing the first line in the dirt. So when the sound of engines broke the morning stillness, I was ready. 5 black SUVs tore down the road dust, pluming behind them like a charging cavalry. They didn't stop politely at the gate. They skidded right up the drive, gravel spitting under their tires, forming a half circle around my yard like they were executing some military maneuver. Karen stepped out first. She wore her usual uniform of arrogance, a beige blazer, dark sunglasses, and her trusty clipboard tucked under one arm. Behind her, a squad of 8 compliance officers fanned out khakis, boots, radios clipped to their belts. One carried a crowbar. Another had a body cam strapped to his chest, recording like this was training footage for a power grab. Mr. Daniels' Karen called her voice loud enough for every goat in the pasture to hear. You've left us no choice. Under emergency HOA directive, this property is hereby placed under administrative hold pending full inspection. I took another slow sip of coffee and shook my head. Looks impressive, I said. But unless that paper is signed by a judge, it's just decorative garbage. You're in violation, she snapped. You're in denial, I shot back. Her jaw tightened, and she gestured toward her crew. 2 began moving toward the south gate. Another approached the barn, crowbar in hand. The drone operator lifted a quadcopter into the air, its buzzing whine slicing through the morning. I raised my voice firm and steady. Everything you're doing right now is being recorded. 5 cameras, 2 deputies watching live, and a county lawyer reviewing the feed in real time. Please keep going. That made a few of her soldiers pause. One looked back at Karen, uncertainty flickering across his face. Another muttered something into his radio, his tone tight with nerves. But Karen kept her composure, clinging to her delusion of control. Proceed, she ordered. The young man with the crowbar reached the barn door. He stretched out a hand and touched the wood. That was his mistake. The motion sensors tripped, and suddenly the yard exploded with sound and light. Spotlights snapped on, flooding the field in harsh white beams. Sirens wailed from hidden speakers, echoing like thunder across the valley. And then a deep voice boomed from every direction, amplified and commanding, "This is Sheriff Mark Daniels. You are trespassing on private property under investigation. Step away from the building immediately." The effect was instant. 2 of the officers jumped back like they'd been burned. The man with the crowbar dropped it onto the dirt with a dull thud. The drone wobbled, then hovered uncertainly as its operator panicked. Karen flinched her sunglasses, hiding her eyes, but not her shock. And that's when Don Wallace walked forward. Wide-brimmed hat, crisp boots, a thick manila file in his hands. He stepped out from behind the barn like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. "Miss Whitmore," he said evenly, "you've crossed onto my land. This strip is legally mine, and you are trespassing." Karen laughed bitterly. "This is a community enforcement action." Don didn't blink. He held up the file. "Funny. Because the community just filed a class action lawsuit against you and your HOA for fraud, harassment, and unlawful property seizure. Effective immediately, you are ordered to cease and desist." Her smile cracked. Not all at once, but piece by piece, the eyes twitching first, then the mouth, then the silence that followed. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "Already did," I said. "Back in 1991, when we offered you lemonade at the gate, you should have walked away then." Before she could answer, 4 county cruisers pulled up behind her SUVs. Lights flashing, sirens silent. Deputies stepped out in perfect unison, my brother leading them. Mark held up a warrant, his voice ringing with authority. "Karen Whitmore, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, impersonating law enforcement, and civil code violations." Her head snapped toward him. "You can't arrest me, that's adorable," Mark said flatly. "But yes, I can." He signaled to his deputies, and within seconds, Karen was in handcuffs. Not dramatic, no screaming, no fight. Just a hollow collapse of the woman who'd built her empire on intimidation. Her officers folded like cheap lawn chairs. One tried to run, made it 10 feet before being tackled. Another sat down on the gravel and muttered, "Can I still qualify as a whistleblower?" Neighbors began to gather at the edge of my property, drawn by the sirens and the spectacle. Phones came out recording every second. Someone cheered. Another clapped. And then, like a spark catching dry grass, the crowd erupted into applause. Mrs. Delaney, the oldest woman in the valley, rolled up in her golf cart, raised her sweet tea glass, and toasted the scene. "Told you," she shouted. Woman's an HOA Hitler, with a hyphenated last name. For the first time in weeks, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. My land was safe for now. Karen was in cuffs, her empire crumbling before the eyes of the very people she'd tried to control. But even as the deputies loaded evidence bags and neighbors clapped, I couldn't shake the itch in the back of my mind. Because when they searched Karen's SUV, they pulled out a tablet. On the screen, one email. No sender. No message body. Just a subject line. Reassignment. Pilot Zone Midwest Beta, and a set of coordinates. Not mine. Somewhere else. Karen hadn't been the architect. She'd just been the pilot program. And the real storm, I realized, was still gathering beyond the horizon. The day Karen was hauled away in cuffs, the valley felt lighter. Neighbors clapped, deputies loaded evidence bags, and the goats bleated like they knew they'd won a war. But while everyone else celebrated, I couldn't ignore the unease gnawing at me. Because sitting on the hood of a county cruiser was the tablet pulled from Karen's SUV, and on its glowing screen was that single line, reassignment, Pilot Zone Midwest Beta. Below it a string of coordinates. Not my land. Not even this county. Somewhere 2 states over. That night, long after the cruisers left and the neighbors went home, I sat in the barn with the tablet balanced on my knees. I replayed the email in my mind over and over like a splinter I couldn't dig out. Karen hadn't been the mastermind. She'd been a pawn, a field test. If there was a Pilot Zone Beta, that meant there had been an Alpha, and if there were 2, there could be 10. Mark came by after midnight, no uniform this time, just jeans and an old ball cap. He dropped a 6-pack on the porch and didn't speak until we were both halfway through a bottle. "You saw the email," he said finally. I nodded. She wasn't acting alone. Mason Ridge Holdings isn't just some shady development group. It's bigger, coordinated. He leaned back, staring into the dark pasture. We've suspected as much. Her HOA isn't the only one pulling stunts like this. But the paper trail's always buried, always routed through shell companies. She was sloppy because she got arrogant. That arrogance is why we nailed her. But whoever's running the playbook, they don't make mistakes. "Then we're not done," I said quietly. "No," he agreed. "Not by a long shot." The next morning I drove out to town to buy feed. At the supply store, a woman approached me in the parking lot. Tall, lean, sunburned arms, the kind of person who worked her land as hard as I did. "You're the guy from the valley, aren't you?" she asked. I hesitated. "Depends who's asking. My name's Grace Harlow. I've got a ranch, 2 counties east. A few weeks ago I got a letter. HOA seal on top. Same wording as yours. Fines, violations, threats to vacate. I thought it was a scam until I saw the news about Karen. Then I knew. She handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a copy of her notice. My stomach turned. Word for word it matched mine. The only difference was the signature, not Karen's. Someone new. Another name I didn't recognize. Another pawn in the game. I gave her everything, photos, files, the forged deed Darren tried to plant. Her eyes widened as she read, then hardened with resolve. "They're running the same playbook," she said. I was next. And she wasn't the only one. Within 2 weeks I heard from 4 more landowners across 3 states. Different names, different HOAs, but the same blueprint, invented violations, fake officers, survey flags, creeping over boundaries. It wasn't coincidence. It was a system. The pattern chilled me. This wasn't just about me, or Karen, or even Simmons Valley. It was a network. A coordinated effort to seize land quietly, legally, by weaponizing the HOA structure. No guns, no bulldozers. Just paper signatures and intimidation until people caved. Grace didn't cave. She filed an injunction with the state attorney's office using the evidence we shared. 3 weeks later, her HOA went silent. Their website vanished. The so-called compliance division disappeared overnight. But the silence wasn't victory, it was retreat. A tactical pause. Late one evening, while I was walking the fence line, I found a black envelope nailed to my gate. No return address, no name. Just a wax seal pressed into the flap. Inside was a single card. On it, a simple symbol, a triangle overlaid with a house. Beneath it, another set of coordinates. I stood there under the porch light, the envelope trembling in my hand. Whoever had sent this wasn't Karen. This was someone bigger. Someone who wanted me to know that even though she was gone, the game wasn't over. I thought about burning it. I thought about driving to the coordinates myself. But in the end, I did what my father would have done. I logged the data, copied it 3 times, and locked it in the same box where he kept the records of every battle he'd fought over this land. Because this fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was for Grace. For the 4 other landowners. For every farmer, every rancher, every family who thought a fence line meant safety until someone like Karen decided a clipboard gave her the right to steal it. And as much as I wanted to believe her arrest was the end, deep down I knew better. Karen wasn't the architect. She was just the mask. The real face was still out there hiding behind shell companies, HOA bylaws, and forged signatures. And sooner or later that face would show itself. When it did, I'd be ready. Because if Karen taught me anything, it's that power doesn't always come in uniforms or guns. Sometimes it comes in paper and smiles. And sometimes the only way to fight it is to shine a light on the shadows. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to another map. Stories like mine may sound outrageous, even unbelievable, but they carry a real lesson. Power doesn't always look like a weapon. Sometimes it hides in fine print, in paperwork slipped under your door, or in rules no one remembers agreeing to. Karen's downfall reminds us that silence only feeds bullies. Had I ignored the notice on my gate or simply paid the fines, I would have lost everything my family built. Instead, by standing firm, gathering evidence, and refusing to bend, I exposed the lie. In life, we all face our own Karens, people or systems that try to control us through fear, manipulation, or intimidation. The only way to win is to know your rights, hold your ground, and speak out even when your voice shakes. So tell me, have you ever faced a Karen moment in your own life? Share your story in the comments below. I read every one. And don't forget to subscribe, because this fight isn't over and the next chapter may be closer to home than you think.